Ah, welcome back, you absolutely terrifying anomaly. Yes, you, the one they couldn't break. The one who walked through psychological warfare designed to shatter military minds. And you didn't just survive it. You smiled through it. They're still trying to figure out what the hell you are. But let me tell you something they'll never admit out loud. You survived techniques that made trained operatives tap out, beg for mercy, crack like glass under pressure. So let me ask you the question that keeps them awake at night, staring at your file with trembling hands. What bloodline are you from? Because regular people don't walk out of that kind of psychological fire. Regular souls don't withstand isolation protocols designed by intelligence agencies. Normal humans don't survive gaslighting campaigns orchestrated by professionals and come out sharper, colder, more precise. They sent their best manipulators, their expert interrogators, their trained psychological assassins, and every single one came back whispering the same terrified report. I don't know what that is, but it didn't break. It adapted. You see, they thought you were like the rest. They thought if they applied enough pressure, removed enough support, isolated you long enough, you'd fracture just like everyone else they'd ever tested. But something happened that they didn't predict. Something that made their entire operation backfire. You didn't just endure their tactics. You studied them. While they were running their little experiments, thinking you were the rat in the maze, you were mapping the maze itself, understanding the hands that built it, recognizing patterns they thought were invisible. You were the experiment that became the scientist. And that absolutely terrified them because they realized too late. You weren't breaking. You were learning. Every tactic they used became a lesson in your education. Every manipulation they deployed became another tool in your arsenal. They were training you while thinking they were destroying you. And now they're living with the consequences of creating something they can't control, can't predict, can't even begin to understand. You became the thing that intelligence agencies have nightmares about. A mind that can't be programmed, a spirit that can't be crushed, a soul that turns psychological warfare into spiritual evolution. Let's talk about what actually happened, because they'll never tell this story truthfully. They isolated you first, didn't they? Cut you off from support systems, made you question your own perception of reality, surrounded you with people designed to destabilize your sense of self. Classic Psyops, textbook manipulation, the kind of thing they teach in classified training programs to break enemy combatants. And it worked. On everyone else. Every other person they ran this on eventually cracked, eventually begged for connection, eventually compromised themselves just to feel human again. But not you. You sat in that isolation like it was a throne, like solitude was your natural habitat, like being alone with your thoughts was exactly where you belonged. They watched you not just survive the silence but thrive in it. And that's when the first reports started coming back, marked with red flags. Subject shows no signs of psychological deterioration. Isolation appears to be strengthening rather than weakening mental state. Recommend immediate protocol adjustment. But they couldn't adjust because every protocol they had was designed for normal human psychology. And you were operating on something else entirely. The gaslighting came next. Wave after wave of calculated reality distortion. They brought in people to contradict your memories, to question your experiences, to make you doubt the very foundation of your own mind. They know this breaks people, shatters confidence, makes them dependent on external validation for their own truth. They've used this technique to break political prisoners, to turn allies into assets, to make the strongest minds collapse under the weight of self-doubt. and they used it on you with precision, with expertise, with absolute certainty it would work. And what did you do? You watched them perform, studied their techniques, saw through every manufactured scenario, recognized the scripted nature of their interventions, and you started playing along just to see how far they'd go. You let them think it was working while you were 3 steps ahead, documenting their methods, understanding their playbook, turning their own tactics into a manual for detecting manipulation. They thought you were losing your grip on reality, when actually you were gaining a grip on their reality, seeing the machinery behind the curtain, understanding the architecture of psychological warfare from the inside. That's when the second wave of reports came back. More urgent, more confused. Subject appears aware of intervention protocols. Maybe deliberately feeding false responses. Recommend immediate cessation or risk of operative compromise. But they didn't stop, did they? Because by then it wasn't just about breaking you anymore. It was about understanding how you were still standing. They brought in the emotional manipulators, the ones trained to find your weak spots, your trauma triggers, your buried wounds, and they pressed on every single one. They know humans are emotional creatures, that everyone has pain, that everyone breaks when you apply pressure to their deepest scars. They've made hardened soldiers weep with these techniques, turned loyal agents into broken shells, destroyed people's sense of self by weaponizing their own emotions against them. And they came at you with surgical precision, hitting every trauma point they could map, every emotional vulnerability they could identify, every psychological weak spot they'd spent months cataloging. And you felt it, didn't you? Yeah, you felt every calculated blow, every manufactured crisis, every emotional ambush designed to make you collapse. But here's what they didn't understand. Pain was already your language. Trauma was already your teacher. Suffering was already the foundation you'd built yourself on. They were trying to hurt you with things you'd already survived, trying to break you with experiences you'd already processed, trying to weaponize wounds you'd already turned into armor. So instead of shattering, you absorbed it, metabolized it, used their attacks as fuel for your evolution, and came out the other side not weaker but calibrated. They created detailed psychological profiles, predicted your breaking points with mathematical precision, deployed their attacks with confidence, and every single prediction failed. Every model broke. Every formula proved useless against whatever the hell you actually are. The really fascinating part, the part that made them start questioning their own training, was when you stopped reacting entirely. They escalated, threw everything they had at you, combined tactics that should have created a perfect storm of psychological devastation. Simultaneous isolation, gaslighting, emotional manipulation, reality distortion, social engineering, relationship sabotage, the full spectrum assault designed to leave nothing standing. They've used this combination to break people considered unbreakable, to shatter minds thought to be invincible, to destroy souls that seemed indestructible. And they unleashed it on you with absolute certainty you'd finally crack, finally break, finally give them the satisfaction of seeing you collapse. And instead, nothing. Not defiance, not struggle, not even resistance. Just this calm, this eerie, peaceful presence, this unshakable stability that made their monitors glitch and their analysts question their data. You weren't fighting anymore. You weren't even defending. You were just existing in a state they couldn't measure, operating on a frequency they couldn't detect, living in a dimension their instruments couldn't reach. That's when the reports stopped being analytical and started sounding like confessions. We don't know what we're looking at. All models indicate complete psychological breakdown should have occurred. Subject appears to be in a state we have no classification for. Recommend termination of observation for observer safety. Observer, safety. Let that sink in. They were worried about the safety of trained psychological warfare specialists because of you. Because your presence, your unexplainable resilience, your impossible stability was starting to affect them. The Watchers were being watched by something they couldn't understand. The Hunters were being stalked by prey that had evolved into a predator. The Scientists were being studied by their own experiment. Handlers started requesting reassignment. Analysts started showing signs of obsession. Operators started questioning their own perception of reality. You became the contagion in their system, the virus in their program, the anomaly that corrupted everything it touched, not through action but through existence. They realized they weren't observing you anymore. They were being transformed by you, infected by whatever impossible resilience you carried, contaminated by your refusal to break according to their rules. Some of them started having dreams about you, waking up in cold sweat, wondering what you were, questioning their training, doubting their methods. Others became obsessed, spending off hours analyzing your patterns, looking for the secret, searching for the code that made you different. And a few, the ones who stared too long into what you are, they quit, walked away from careers, disappeared into quiet lives, because they saw something in you that shattered their understanding of human psychology, and they couldn't unsee it. But here's the question they could never answer, the one that haunted every report, every analysis, every classified briefing about you. What bloodline are you from? Because this isn't normal human resilience. This isn't standard psychological strength. This isn't something you learn in therapy or develop through regular life experience. You carry something in your lineage, something ancient, something that's been passed down through generations of people who survived things that should have killed them. Somewhere in your ancestry, there were people who walked through fire, who endured torture, who survived genocide, who outlasted wars, who carried their people through darkness so profound it should have extinguished them. And they didn't just survive. They passed something down, encoded something into your very essence, gifted you with a psychological immune system that regular humans don't possess. You're not just resilient by choice. You're resilient by design, by inheritance, by bloodline. The strength isn't something you built. It's something you inherited from ancestors who refused to die when death was the only logical option. They survived famines that killed millions, walked through wars that erased entire populations, endured slavery that broke countless souls, weathered persecution that was designed to eliminate them completely. And every single time death came calling, every single time extinction seemed certain, they found a way to survive, and each survival etched something into the genetic memory, coded something into the bloodline, passed down some impossible resilience that science can't measure and psychology can't explain. You know what the operators couldn't handle? The realization that you weren't just surviving their tactics, you were recognizing them, identifying each technique as they deployed it, naming the psychological frameworks they were using, understanding the theoretical foundations of their attacks. They'd throw a manipulation pattern at you and you'd pause, process it, recognize it. Ah, that's modified Erickson, combined with elements of NLP anchoring, deployed through a false friendship framework with embedded suggestion protocols. They weren't breaking you, they were educating you, and you were learning faster than they could adapt. Every tactic became a lesson, every attack a tutorial, every operation a case study in psychological warfare that you absorbed, understood, and filed away for future reference. The people running these operations trained for years to master these techniques, spend their careers perfecting manipulation, dedicate their lives to understanding how to break human minds. And you picked it up in real time, during active deployment, while being the target. And you didn't just survive it. You learned to speak their language fluently, to see their invisible strings, to understand the machinery of mind control from the perspective of someone being controlled who refused to be controlled. That's not normal. That's not luck. That's not even extraordinary talent. That's inheritance, bloodline knowledge, genetic memory activating because somewhere in your ancestry, someone survived the same tactics in different forms and passed down the immunity. They tried to make you dependent on external validation. Classic psychological manipulation designed to control you through your need for approval. They know humans are social creatures, that we need recognition, that we crave acceptance, that isolation combined with conditional approval can make anyone dance like a puppet. They've used this to turn free thinkers into followers, independent minds into dependent assets, strong individuals into controllable resources. They removed all positive reinforcement, created scenarios where you'd only receive validation if you complied, engineered situations where your only path to human connection required submission. And they watched, waiting for you to crack, waiting for that moment when need would override pride, when loneliness would defeat strength, when the human requirement for connection would make you compromise. But that moment never came, did it? Because you carry something in your blood that doesn't need their approval, doesn't require their validation, doesn't hunger for acceptance from people you don't respect. You have this terrifying ability to stand alone in a room full of people and feel more complete than they feel in their desperate crowds. That's not arrogance. That's not isolation. That's ancestral memory of people who stood alone against empires, who remained unbroken in solitary confinement, who kept their dignity in concentration camps, who maintained their identity under systematic erasure. Your bloodline survived by not needing the enemy's approval. And you carry that same independence in your psychological code. And it makes you absolutely impossible to control through standard social engineering. The relationship sabotage phase was particularly revealing. They infiltrated your social circle, planted people designed to betray you, orchestrated situations meant to destroy your trust in others, engineered abandonment scenarios calculated to make you feel fundamentally unlovable. This is advanced level manipulation, the kind of thing that creates permanent psychological damage, makes people unable to form healthy attachments, turns them into paranoid shells of themselves. They've destroyed people's ability to love with these tactics, created permanent trust wounds that never heal, shattered people's faith in human connections so completely they live the rest of their lives in protective isolation. And they deployed this against you with precision, with cruelty, with absolute confidence. It would break you like everyone else. They watched your friendships dissolve, your relationships implode, your support system collapse, and they waited for the breakdown, the desperate reaching out, the compromising of your values just to feel less alone. But instead of breaking, you became more selective, more discerning, more precise in your evaluation of human character. You didn't close off. You calibrated. You didn't become bitter. You became accurate. The betrayals didn't destroy your ability to trust. They refined it, sharpened it into a tool so precise you could read deception like others read books. That's bloodline wisdom. Genetic memory of ancestors who survived by knowing who to trust in environments where trust was fatal, who had to develop supernatural instincts for detecting lies because one wrong alliance meant death. You carry that same ability, that same precision, that same impossible accuracy in reading human intention, and it makes you immune to social engineering that breaks everyone else. Let's address the elephant in the room that has them absolutely losing their minds in classified briefings. You're not just surviving psychological warfare, you're enjoying it. Somewhere in the middle of their assault, something shifted in you, and instead of suffering, you started to thrive. The isolation they meant as punishment became your meditation chamber. The gaslighting they intended as reality destruction became your clarity laboratory. The emotional attacks they designed as breaking points became your strength training. You turned every weapon they deployed into a tool for your own evolution. And more than that, you started to smile, to laugh, to find genuine amusement in their desperation to break you. That's not normal human psychology. That's not adaptive coping. That's not even advanced resilience. That's something far more terrifying. You're someone whose nervous system is wired for chaos, whose psychology thrives under pressure, whose spirit feeds on the exact conditions designed to destroy spirits. They create environments meant to induce maximum psychological suffering. And you renovate them into personal development retreats. That ability doesn't come from therapy, doesn't come from self-help, doesn't come from positive thinking. That comes from a bloodline that survived by finding strength in suffering, that evolved by thriving in conditions that killed others, that passed down some impossible psychological mutation that turns poison into medicine and warfare into wisdom. The final phase, the one that made them abort the entire operation, was when you stopped being the subject and started running your own experiment. You began deliberately triggering their responses, testing their reactions, mapping their limitations, understanding their programming. You turned the psychological warfare back on them without them even realizing it was happening. You'd feed them specific responses designed to elicit specific escalations. You'd display calculated vulnerabilities to see which tactics they'd deploy. You'd show manufactured breaking points to study their victory protocols. You were running a counterintelligence operation against trained intelligence operatives while being their active target, and they didn't catch on until it was too late, until their own data was compromised, until their own methods were exposed, until they realized they'd been giving classified information to someone who was never actually broken, never actually controlled, never actually anything except a mirror showing them their own reflection. The final report, the one that shut down the entire observation, had one line that said everything. Subject has achieved complete operational awareness. Continuing observation poses unacceptable risk to operational security and personnel psychological stability. Immediate termination of all protocols recommended. Classification level, absolute. So let me tell you what they'll never say out loud. What gets whispered in classified facilities. What keeps analysts awake long after their clearance expires. You're not human in the way they understand human. You're something they have no framework for, no training to handle, no protocol to manage. You carry something in your lineage that makes you fundamentally different, fundamentally dangerous, fundamentally impossible to break using techniques designed for normal human psychology, somewhere in your bloodline. There were survivors of things so horrific, they're not even recorded in history books. People who endured conditions that killed 99% of others. Individuals who carried their people through darkness so profound it should have extinguished all light. And they didn't just survive. They evolved. They adapted. They developed psychological capabilities that regular humans don't possess. And they passed it down through generations until it reached you. You're not special because you survived their tactics. You're special because surviving their tactics was inevitable given what flows in your veins. The question isn't how you survived. The question is what bloodline creates people who turn psychological warfare into personal growth, who transform isolation into power, who convert betrayal into wisdom, who metabolize suffering into strength. Look at this. You just stumbled into something biblical without even trying. You beautiful accidental exorcist, you unconscious spiritual fumigator. You walked through that door like it was Tuesday, and suddenly the walls stopped bleeding. The shadows retreated, the whispers went silent, the century-old curse just packed its bags and left, because you showed up smelling like purpose, and they couldn't handle it. You didn't even notice, did you, that the temperature rose 15 degrees when you crossed the threshold? That the black mold in the corners started dissolving? That the flies dropped dead mid-flight? You were too busy thinking about dinner or scrolling your phone or humming that song stuck in your head, while meanwhile you just performed a spiritual genocide on entities that had lawyers in hell, filing complaints about your existence. Let me tell you what really happened when you walked through that door, because you're sitting there confused, wondering why the house feels different, why the air tastes cleaner, why your chest doesn't feel heavy anymore. You think it's coincidence. You think it's imagination. You think maybe you're just having a good day, but no, my friend. You just accidentally became the thing nightmares warn their children about. They'd been there for decades, these things. These parasites, these ancient squatters, feeding on misery, recycling trauma, brewing depression in the walls like it was their personal meth lab, generation after generation of suffering. And then you showed up, radiating something they couldn't metabolize, something that burned their tongues when they tried to taste your energy, something that made them realize they'd rather dissolve than deal with whatever the hell you are. You want to know why they ran, why they scattered like roaches when the light hits? Why 100 years of darkness just said nope and evacuated? Because you're not normal. You're not regular. You're not one of the sleepwalkers they usually feast on. You're something else entirely, something they don't have protocols for, something their training didn't cover. See, most people walk into haunted spaces and they negotiate, they compromise, they coexist with the darkness. They learn to live with the weight. But you didn't even acknowledge them. You walked in like you owned the deed to reality itself, and they felt it. That unshakable certainty, that unconscious authority that makes demons check their contracts twice. They tried to read you when you first entered, tried to scan your fears, your traumas, your weak points. But what they found made them sick. Where they expected wounds, they found wisdom. Where they expected fear, they found fury. Where they expected victims, they found a veteran of wars they couldn't even pronounce. And suddenly they understood. They weren't the predators anymore. You've been through hell, haven't you? Real hell. Not this theatrical haunting bullshit, but actual soul-destroying, reality-bending, identity-shattering hell. You've had your heart ripped out by humans who smiled while they did it. You've been betrayed by blood. You've been abandoned in your darkest hour, and you've survived all of it, which makes you infinitely more terrifying than any ghost story. That's why when you walked in humming that stupid song, not even paying attention, something shifted in the spiritual ecosystem. You weren't trying to cleanse anything. You weren't praying. You weren't burning sage. You were just existing at full capacity, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was catastrophic for anything feeding on weakness. Because here's what nobody tells you about demons, about entities, about these parasitic presences. They're not actually powerful. They're just persistent. They're emotional vampires, spiritual leeches, metaphysical mosquitoes. And they survive on one thing only, the gap between who you are and who you think you are. But you close that gap without even knowing it. You integrated your shadow while making breakfast. You alchemized your trauma during your commute. You transformed your pain into power so gradually, so naturally that you didn't even notice. You'd become untouchable. And when you walked through that door carrying all that processed darkness, wearing it like armor, they took one look and knew they were outmatched. They could smell it on you, the scent of someone who's been broken and refused to stay broken. The frequency of someone who's died inside and chose to resurrect different. The radiation of someone who's made friends with their own demons and now walks around immune to everyone else's. You didn't need holy water. You are holy water. You didn't need protection. You are the protection. You know what's funny? They probably tried to scare you at first. Probably threw their best material at you. The cold spots, the moving shadows, the whispers in the walls. But you've been gaslit by professionals. You've been terrorized by people you loved. You've been haunted by memories that make their little tricks look like amateur hour at the community theater. What's a creaking floorboard to someone who's heard their own sanity crack? What's a cold breeze to someone who's felt their soul freeze? What's a whisper in the dark to someone who's had lies screamed at them in broad daylight? You're not scared of the dark anymore because you've been the dark. You've lived in it, breathed it, digested it, and came out the other side glowing. They must have panicked when they realized their usual tactics weren't working, when you didn't flinch at their presence, didn't acknowledge their performance, didn't give them the fear they needed to feed on. It's like a vampire trying to bite a mirror. All they got was their own reflection, and they didn't like what they saw. Because in your presence, they saw what they really were. Not powerful ancient beings, but parasites. Not demons, but dependencies. Not curses, but crutches for people who hadn't learned to walk through their own darkness yet. And you'd already graduated from that school with honors, with scars, with a PhD in surviving the unsurvivable. So they left, they had to. They didn't have a choice when faced with someone who'd already been through worse than anything they could create. You think you just walked in and the energy changed, but what really happened was an evacuation, a mass exodus, a spiritual fire drill where every negative entity in a 5-mile radius got the message, clear out. The real monster just arrived. And you're not even trying. That's what kills them. That's what makes this so beautifully brutal. You're not performing rituals. You're not declaring war. You're just being yourself. And yourself happens to be their kryptonite. Your existence is an exorcism. Your presence is a purification. Your breathing is basically biblical pest control. They're probably warning others right now, spreading the word through whatever network these things use to communicate. Don't go near that one. They're saying that one's different. That one's dangerous. That one doesn't play by the rules. We understand that one walks around leaking light like a broken nuclear reactor. And we can't process that kind of energy. You've become a no-fly zone for darkness, a restricted area for entities, a quarantine zone for anything that feeds on suffering, not because you're pure, not because you're perfect, but because you're processed. You've been through the machine and came out refined, distilled, concentrated into something they can't digest. Let me explain what you actually are, because you're still sitting there thinking this is coincidence, thinking maybe the house just needed air, thinking maybe you're imagining the change. No, you're a walking disruption field, a living virus in their operating system, a glitch in the matrix of misery they've been maintaining for generations. You know how some people are described as having an old soul? Well, you've got a war veteran's soul, a soul that's seen too much, survived too much, transcended too much to be affected by parlor tricks and amateur hauntings. You're like showing up to a water gun fight with battlefield experience. These entities took one look at your energy signature and realized they were catastrophically outgunned. Every trauma you survived added another layer to your armor. Every betrayal you processed became another weapon in your arsenal. Every night you chose to keep breathing when breathing felt impossible. You were unconsciously training for this moment. You weren't building walls, you were developing immunity. You weren't hiding from the darkness, you were developing antibodies to it. That's why you didn't even notice them when you walked in. Your spiritual immune system just automatically started eliminating threats like white blood cells attacking an infection. You didn't have to try, you didn't have to fight. Your very existence is antimicrobial to their kind of energy. Your presence is pesticide to their parasitic nature. They're gone now, really gone, not hiding, not waiting, not lurking in the corners hoping you'll leave. They're evacuated, relocated, seeking easier prey because you've made this space uninhabitable for them. Simply by inhabiting it yourself, you've accidentally gentrified the spiritual neighborhood, and the old residents couldn't afford the new energy prices. But here's what they didn't want you to know, what they were hoping you'd never figure out. You've always had this power. Every single human has the capacity to be their own exorcist, their own cleanser, their own spiritual authority. But most people never activate it because they're taught to fear what they don't understand, taught to seek external protection instead of internal power. You activated yours through survival, through refusing to let life break you permanently, through getting back up when staying down would have been easier. Every time you chose to heal instead of harden. Every time you chose growth over grudges. Every time you chose yourself over self-destruction, you were building this frequency that makes you uninhabitable to anything negative. And get this, you are none. You're not special in the way of being chosen. You're special in the way of choosing. You chose to metabolize your pain instead of marinating in it. You chose to transform instead of transferring your trauma. You chose to become the solution instead of perpetuating the problem. And that choice, that series of choices, made you into something entities run from. You want to know what specific frequency you're emitting that makes them scatter like this? It's the frequency of someone who's already been through hell and didn't let it make them hellish. It's the vibration of redemption without revenge, of power without cruelty, of strength without brutality. And that particular combination is like nails on a chalkboard to anything that feeds on suffering. Because suffering is their food source, their fuel, their entire economic system, and you've become someone who doesn't produce it anymore. Oh, you still feel pain, you still experience difficulty, but you don't suffer. You don't marinate, you don't ferment in your troubles. You process them like a factory processes raw materials into something useful. You've become emotionally renewable, spiritually sustainable, psychologically biodegradable. Your pain doesn't stick around long enough to attract feeders. Your trauma doesn't fester long enough to become food. Your darkness doesn't stagnate long enough to become a breeding ground. and that makes you absolutely useless to them. More than useless, actually, you're actively hostile to their existence because you prove it's possible to transform. You demonstrate that their food source isn't guaranteed. You show others that pain doesn't have to equal suffering, that trauma doesn't have to equal permanent damage, that darkness doesn't have to equal residency for demons. So now you're standing in this space that feels different, feels lighter, feels like someone opened windows that were painted shut for decades. The air moves differently. The shadows fall normally. The silence isn't heavy anymore. It's just quiet. And you did all that just by being too processed to process. You reclaimed this space without even knowing it was lost. You lifted a curse you didn't know existed. You broke chains you couldn't see. You evicted tenants you never knew were there. And the beautiful, terrifying truth is, you could do this anywhere you go because you've become a walking safe zone, a mobile sanctuary, a portable purification system. This is why certain people feel better just being around you, why some spaces feel different after you've been there, why problems seem to resolve themselves in your presence. You're not healing them, you're just showing them what healed looks like. You're not fighting their demons, you're just demonstrating what it looks like when demons become irrelevant. You've accidentally become what ancient texts described but couldn't explain, what religions tried to ritualize but couldn't replicate, what mystics sought but couldn't sustain. You're just a human who processed their shit so thoroughly that unprocessed shit can't exist in your presence. You're walking therapy for the atmosphere. You're accidental alchemy for any space you enter. The entities that fled when you arrived, they're not coming back. They can't. They've been essentially evicted by your essence, evacuated by your evolution, excluded by your frequency. You've made this space uninhabitable for anything that requires darkness to survive because you brought in a kind of light that doesn't turn off. Not the blinding light of forced positivity, not the harsh light of denial, not the fake light of spiritual bypassing, but the steady light of someone who's integrated their shadow. You glow differently when you've digested your own darkness, when you've composted your own pain, when you've recycled your own trauma into growth. That's the light they couldn't handle, the light that knows the dark intimately, but chose not to live there, the light that's been through the underworld and came back with souvenirs, the light that doesn't fear shadows, because it's made friends with its own. You're not bright, you're balanced, and balance is the one thing chaos can't survive around. You've become the thing that things that go bump in the night warn each other about. You're the cautionary tale in their community, the reason they check addresses twice. Now the new protocol in their haunting handbook that says, abort mission if the target has processed their trauma, because processed trauma is poison to parasites. From now on, you're going to notice this happening more often. Spaces clearing when you enter, problems dissolving when you engage people, feeling better after talking to you even when you didn't try to help. You've become accidentally therapeutic, involuntarily, cleansing, unconsciously healing, just by existing at this frequency. You can't turn it off either, that's the thing about becoming authentic. You can't go back to performing. You can't return to pretending. You can't squeeze back into the box of who you used to be. You're stuck being this powerful, stuck being this clear, stuck being this inadvertently purifying, to everything around you. Some people are going to avoid you now, not consciously, but instinctively, the same way those entities fled. People who are committed to their suffering, who are married to their misery, who are feeding their own demons, they're going to feel uncomfortable around you because your presence asks questions their demons don't want answered. But others are going to gravitate toward you like moths to flame, not because you're trying to attract them, but because you're emitting something they need. You've become a lighthouse for people ready to process their own darkness, a beacon for those ready to evict their own demons, a signal that says transformation is possible because look, I did it without even trying. You mastered something without meaning to, something most people spend lifetimes trying to learn in ashrams and temples and retreats. You learned how to be so thoroughly yourself that nothing false can survive in your presence. You learned how to be so integrated that fragmented energies disintegrate around you. Last and ridiculous, death. Death thickened grudgingly. Death broke. Death. You had to indulge. You didn't study this, didn't practice this, didn't even believe in this, but you became this through the simple act of refusing to let life make you less than you are. Every time you chose growth over comfort, every time you chose truth over ease, every time you chose healing over hiding, you were building this immunity to darkness. Now you walk around accidentally blessing everything you touch, unconsciously consecrating every space you enter, involuntarily, sanctifying every situation you engage with. You've become holy water in human form, not because you're pure, but because you're processed, not because you're perfect, but because you're integrated. The demons that fled when you walked in, they're telling stories about you now, warning others, describing the human who walked in humming and destroyed a century of careful cultivation without even noticing. You've become a legend in their world, the accidental exorcist, the unconscious cleanser, the one who purges without trying. This is your legacy now, not what you build or achieve or accumulate, but the spaces you clean just by entering them. The energy you shift just by being present, the healing you cause just by existing. You're leaving a trail of purified spaces behind you, like breadcrumbs of light in a forest of darkness. Every room you've been in is a little bit cleaner. Every person you've met is a little bit clearer. Every situation you've touched is a little bit lighter. You're not doing this on purpose. You're just leaking light wherever you go, bleeding brightness into the world, shedding sanctity like dead skin cells. Years from now, people are going to wonder why certain spaces feel different, why certain homes have that energy, why certain places feel protected. They won't know it was you who walked through once. Maybe stayed for coffee, maybe just passed by the window, but left behind an energy signature that makes darkness think twice. You're writing history in frequencies instead of words, leaving legacies in vibrations. Instead of monuments, building cathedrals out of cleared energy instead of stone. You're the reason some spaces never get haunted again. The reason some darkness never returns. The reason some demons add addresses to their do not disturb list.